To avoid me butchering your name, say your name out loud, please.
Guilbault.
There we go. Um, would have probably gotten close, but felt like I had made a mistake. But right on. I'm from Southern Louisiana, so we do interesting things with letters as well.
Yeah, I
So,
read that about you.
oh, you did research as well. I appreciate it.
I did.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
let's get weird. Um, so I want to start with some context. I want to talk about your career, kind of in the food and hospitality industry, to begin with, so that people understand like where you come from and the vantage point with which you look at the industry. So we could probably start in the middle, but walk me through that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, very much like you, I have been through it in many different seasons and many different chapters, and kind of had all sorts of stops and starts and pivots and turns. It's more like chutes and ladders. But I did start my career as a high school dropout. I left home at 17 and worked my way through all sorts of different jobs, and landed with a very small business helping other small businesses set up their computer systems at home offices. And one of my clients was the best friend of my uncle from high school, and he had an egg brokerage firm. And I had been doing, hourly jobs in restaurants. I'd tried being a server, and I was absolutely disgraceful and been fired. California Pizza Kitchen, by the way, was responsible for that firing. And, I was completely, obsessed with what this gentleman was doing with his business. And I had no idea. It had never occurred to me how things like, 10,000 pies showed up in Vons across California all at once, for Thanksgiving. Like, where'd the pies come from? I never thought about it. It was just the pies were there. And it was like, okay, cool. And, what do you want? Apple or pumpkin or what? So he had this whole crazy business. And I said to him, look, I think what you're doing is phenomenal. I want to learn everything. If you let me work side by side with you, I will grow your business. I'm sure I can do that. And he, for some strange reason said, okay. And I worked with him for 5.5 years. And that was kind of like my jump into food from the non-restaurant start that I had. And from there, I realized that I wanted to take a chance and go into culinary. And if I didn't do it soon, I felt like the moment was going to escape me. And I was kind of, stepping into my mid 20s at that point. And so I took a really big leap, and I had a lot of mentors and, supportive people who were like, go for it, do it. And ultimately, landed in France, went to culinary school there, worked my way around Europe, cooked, and I really wanted to become an executive chef and did all of that, and landed the job and realized that I hated it. And oh my God, what do I do now? Because, there's this whole trail of blood, sweat, and tears that I've just, followed to get to this role. And am I the only person in the world who's ever made such a huge mistake? And then what do I do? How do I marry all of the things that I love about the work that I've done over all the years before into something that's a new pathway? And I didn't even know things like food and beverage management existed. I didn't understand that. And I also didn't go to college. But I don't know that many people who do go to college understand those roles either, unless they go to a hospitality school and, those doors are opened for them. So anyway, I will not regale you with the rest of the career history because I'm 47 now and there's 30 years of it. But the long and the short of it is when I went on maternity leave, I decided to write a book because it was right before the pandemic that this decision was made. And there was just this real lack of hope in our industry. And I had experienced this kind of wonderful side of food. And I had experienced this with my teams. I mean, my first team was 8 people. And my last team included 1,200 people at the headquarters of Google in Mountain View, executing 60,000 meals a day across 42 restaurants. And I didn't know that any of these roles existed when I started. And I thought, you know what, we got to crack this open and we need to show people that if they do the hard work and if they're willing to go on the ride and learn, that everything's available to them. If they stick with it, right, and if they don't get derailed by the hard stuff, and it is hard, and you know that, I know that, but it's hard everywhere, right? And so I decided to write this book because I wanted to talk about the opportunity side of food, the side that you and I know very deeply, but that is never discussed kind of in the mainstream. We always pick apart the problems, and the reputation is horrendous in the food industry, especially the restaurant industry, and it's very, very well deserved. But there is this whole other side. And I thought, I want to talk about this other side because I've experienced it. I lived it. I've been blessed by it. And I've been, an eyewitness, a front row seat to so many team members go from hourly roles into, very senior leadership roles where they could become the change that they wanted to see. But you can't become that change if you keep quitting every job you have because your boss is a dick, or you don't want to like work so hard, or you want more free time or flexibility, or these things. And I think the industry has to respond to those things, and we have to train and give roadmaps for those things. But you got to stay in it to win it, right? So that's kind of the snapshot of how the book happened in the early years of my career.
You talk about quitting in a couple of different capacities, and I think that it's really important to call it out because it wasn't really until the pandemic that I really saw the value in quitting, and I kind of already started that process for myself of extricating from myself and my life the things that were no longer congruous in my life. As an example, I owned a bar that printed money in Hollywood, and it was awesome. I met my wife there. She had her 25th birthday there when I was a much younger man. But 11 years into owning and operating this bar, it wasn't an asset anymore. Even though it still made money, it was a liability. It negatively impacted my overall lifestyle. It was something that took energy from me instead of giving me energy. And it's like there wasn't a person on the planet that I could talk to that would, I'd say, hey, I really need to get rid of this thing. I'd say, well, does it make money? Yeah. I mean, do you spend a lot of time in it? No, not particularly. But like I could feel it. I could feel that it was a drain. It felt like a shoe that was getting ready to drop. And so there is this idea around strategic quitting, and not in the way that you referenced, where like you're just making these lateral changes in your life, right? You're just moving from one dead end position to the next in a very lateral way, never actually moving forward, just kind of moving sideways. As opposed to, I think, what you're talking about, which is figuring out what resonates with you and moving in that direction, even if that means moving away from something that you're currently doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really hard to move away from the comforts of success, right? Because it's a little bit of a trap because the unknown is really scary. And at the end of the day, we all have to pay our bills and we've all worked hard to get where we are, regardless of whatever the role is. And so the unknown kind of becomes this grass is greener situation where it's like, do you want to take the leap? And as you get older, as you have more responsibilities, that becomes more and more scary, I think. But it's also, important to talk to people about what they want for themselves. And that matters a lot. And we don't often have those conversations in professional capacities. It's kind of like left to each individual person to figure that out, or hopefully they have some great mentors or, people who've been through it who can tell the truth of what it's like to make those kinds of decisions. But career development on its own, it really rests within all of us. What do we really want for ourselves? What does success really look like? Success to somebody might be a car or a big TV, or knowing that there's money in the bank for retirement or a house or whatever it might be. For somebody else, it might be feeling good about the work that they're doing and going to sleep at night knowing they helped somebody else, and that they have the comforts of home, and actually they are really encouraged and inspired by growing others and helping them on their way. And there's all different shades of what that looks like across the spectrum. That's just a teeny tiny little percentage of what success can mean. And I think we don't talk enough about what each person needs to go through in order to pick and pull that apart, and also accept that it changes over time. What it looked like at 20 is different than 25, is different at 30, is different at almost 50. It's all the things. And to constantly reevaluate that and check in so that you're not just on this roller coaster that you've buckled into and it's taking you places and suddenly you're like, how did I get here? what happened on this journey? And I think it's really helpful to talk about those things because we just don't talk about it enough in team environments and also just in our families.
Don't you feel like a lot of that stems from fear? So you're looking at an industry where, by and large, people have been kicked in the stomach so many times, day after day, year after year, that I mean, I get on one-on-one calls with people that are looking to change their lives, but they don't know how to change their life. They also don't know how they want their life to change. I say, where do you want to be in a year? And it's like, not where I am today.
Mm.
And that's the extent of the dreaming, that for so many people, it has been so hard for so long that they
Yeah.
forgot those dreams that they had, like the day before they opened the doors to the restaurant, because they had envisioned a life different for themselves in that moment. And then the day you open the restaurant, everything changes and it becomes about survival, not
Yeah.
thriving.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and
It's so
so,
true.
how do you start that paradigm shift in your mind? How do you begin to go from this scarcity mindset to a mindset of possibility, of abundance?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, you have to believe in yourself and you have to believe in your capabilities. If you are bold enough to open up a food operation of any kind, it's already in there, right? And I think that, we become aware of things as we kind of need to, right? Nobody knows everything from the start. And we won't get into like biblical references or anything, but it's kind of like maybe a good thing that we don't know what we're in for, right? Because maybe we wouldn't sign up for it in the first place. But that's just kind of the ride of. And I think believing in yourself and understanding that you don't need to have the answers and that you are going to figure it out. And the best leaders that I have ever worked with have literally all held this place of, you know what, we don't know, we're just going to figure it out together and we're going to talk about it honestly and we're going to do our darndest to make this thing happen. And if it had happened before and if it was easy, somebody else would have already done it, period. And I think when you know what's motivating you and what's keeping you going, that's the grit that becomes the secret sauce that keeps you in it. But there also has to be a construct and an environment for like success, right? And I think in food operations, in particular, like independent restaurant owners and operators, there is not nearly enough access to tools and resources that are tried and true that very large corporate entities have, that they've, built and modeled for years and years and decades that work. To be honest with you, that's why I started Mise Mode, because it was like, everybody needs to know these tools, these processes, and be able to utilize them, to understand them so that they can run their businesses profitably, so that they have cash flow and they can keep the doors open, so they can put the right team members in place with the right skill sets so that they can get incrementally stronger and better and grow a business, really methodically. And it's very, very difficult to do this. And it's very difficult to stay open. And right now, and for the last 10 years, and let's be honest, for the last 40 years, it's been hard in food, right? The margins are small. And if you don't operate your business, with a really disciplined approach, it's over pretty quick. So I think tools, access, mentors, and truth telling is kind of the basis for that success that everyone's looking for.
You zoom out and you look at my show and you see 430 episodes, but they're not episodes and they're not guests on the show. It's 430 something ideas. And every guest that I have on the show is the expression of an idea that I want to relate to the audience generally. And I don't want it to come from me because I think everybody's tired of hearing me talk.
I don't know about that, but carry on.
But I've got to believe that the same is true with a book. That you should be able to, that you in creating this book, you had a specific intention, that there was a singular idea that you wanted to get across, and that thesis is what the book is built around, and everything else supports that argument, props that argument up, moves that argument forward. What is that idea? What is the big idea behind the book?
The big idea behind the book is that the opportunity's there, and it's your choice to grab it or not.
And what does that look like? How does that manifest? For those that don't know, that live behind the veil,
yeah.
When you pull it back, what is the opportunity that you see?
Well, I mean, I think the food world, and I'm setting aside all of the things that we know about it that, are hard, don't work, challenging. The things that do work are that the barrier for entry is fairly low. And there's a lot of opportunity with organizations to move from entry level into management in a pretty rapid period of time, right? If you can demonstrate some very core skills. And when you move into management, very likely it's a complete paradigm shift, because just because you were good at doing something yourself with your own hands doesn't mean that you have any skill set to then help others achieve those same things with that same success, because now you're not doing, now you're influencing and you're starting to lead. So, there's that piece of it there, but I think the idea is, if you're a young person and you don't know what you want to do with your life, come into food, because you're going to learn about people. And the food industry is really a people industry, and all of the skills that you learn there are transferable to any industry that you're in. And you might just get bitten by the bug, right? But if you don't, there are all sorts of incredible programs. I mean, the corporate programs right now where you can get a free college degree, you can get to six figures in 3 years. They guarantee it. Look at places like Chipotle, Starbucks, even Walmart. Like, everybody has these very clear programs. Despite what you think about those organizations, like, they're really trying to drive talent and development and hopefully earn some loyalty to keep those folks in place, right, as they grow their workforce. So, my daughter, who's 5, if she's faced with college, in 13 years or so, I would very happily say to her, hey, if you want to learn something while you're figuring out what you really want to do, go take a job in food, jump on one of those free degree programs. On the other side of it, you're going to have, zero college debt. You're going to have management experience. You're going to have relationships. And most of all, you're going to have all these transferable skills that will serve you as you start to figure out what you do want to do. And I think by and large, a lot of people will stay in food because, once you get bitten by the food bug, it's really hard to kind of get away from that. And the pathways are endless. And so, I think you've read the book. In the book, there are QR codes across every chapter, right? There's this chapter summary of skill sets and takeaways that you kind of get from each step on the way. And there's the QR code that links to an industry leader talking about his or her own career journey, starting from the beginning in their families, how they started, what their hourly jobs were, summer jobs as teenagers, into hourly roles, and how they ended up, in many of them, in billion-dollar P&L roles, many of them in several $100 million multi-unit roles, some of them in mid-level management roles spanning from health and safety all the way to culinary, private jet, food management, like, you name it, it's all there. And I think, when we look at food and we talk about food, we talk about restaurants and we talk about chefs, we talk about operations and we talk about culinary. But that's like a big piece, but that's not the whole piece, right? Like, that's not the pie. There's like a whole bunch of other jobs and roles and opportunities in that. So kind of cracking that open across the book and helping people just to broaden their perspective and imagine, oh, hey, I could do that if this person did that. And I've done jobs like this. I could do those things, and to encourage them and help them and support them on the path, right? That's, for me, that's the goal with this work.
It's this evolutionary idea, the idea that it goes from being a restaurant job or a hospitality job or a food business job to a career. And I think that what bridges that gap is this idea that you talk about in a bunch of different ways. It's road mapping is what it is. It's saying you start here and this is where you can end up. And not like if you work really hard and you hope for the best, but that there's a step-by-step process that will take you from here to there. And I think it's a lesson for every owner and operator listening today, because if you can chart what that looks like for you in your own career, whether you own that business or you operate it, and you can do it for everyone that works alongside you and beneath you, it's transformative. Is that been your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that, I think everybody can resonate. They can think about the leaders in their lives who've inspired them, who's pushed them. Like, there's a difference between a demanding leader and a toxic leader. A lot of people have difficult bosses, but are they pulling you to bring your best and to perform at your best and to discover what you're capable of? Those kinds of bosses you look back on later and go, gosh, they were hard, but they really pushed me. And look at what I was able to do. And I think, discomfort and growing is something that we need to talk more about. Failure is something that we need to talk more about. And that's what I love about being this salty old age of, like, 47, where I'm like, yeah, I blew it. I blew it here. I blew it here. I blew it here. And all these other people I know did too. And guess what? The sun came out tomorrow. We all picked ourselves up and, we rubbed off our skin knees and, we just carried forward. And that's, kind of this metaphor for life, right? Nothing's perfect and it's never going to go away. You plan it, whether you have this like full career path where you know exactly what you want to do, curveballs happen, life happens. And I think it goes back to what we originally started talking about, knowing what you want for yourself and then not letting anything get in the way of you achieving that, right? Because it's easy to blame other things or failure or fear or circumstances. But at the end of the day, your career journey rests on your shoulders, right? And you have the opportunity at every point to step out and say, I'm not doing this. Like, I refuse to go down here, and pivot and go another direction, and to put in what you want to get out of it. And you just never know what's going to open up, but for sure, opportunities will continue to come if you keep going forward and bringing your best every day.
When you talk about this in the book, this idea of like evolving leadership styles and how your definition of leadership changed over time. If there's only one universal truth that I've seen in my career, is that my greatest obstacle to overcome has always been myself. And what I've learned over time, or what I didn't know at that time. Hubris is a mother, if you know what I mean.
There's no place for it.
So,
you start figuring that out, right? In your management journey, you're just like,
really do.
Oh yeah, that actually is not going to work at all. Not at all.
For sure. And so, that being the case, walk me through it, because I think in the earliest stages of our careers, we spend a lot of time talking about management. And then over time, you figure out that management is just controlling human behavior, which is not the most efficient way to get things done. And so you begin to look at leadership styles, and, you wear it like an outfit. You try on this one and that one to figure out what works for you. In doing research for the book, you studied a bunch of different leadership styles, and you've adopted several along the way yourself. What have you found to be most effective, and what are some of the universal truths around that?
I think transparency has become kind of my biggest, default leadership style of just saying the truth, right? Like, we don't need to hide our imperfections or the things that have gone wrong. Everybody can collectively learn from them, and also appreciate that they're not alone in the room. And I think we all have these like inner voices in our heads where we tell ourselves that we don't know something and somebody else will do it better, or we're failing because we don't instantly have this success unfolding in a particular project that we had mapped out meticulously, and then it just went sideways because people are people, and that's how life goes. And I think if you're just honest with your teams, if you're honest with yourself, I could tell you, I had this really transformative experience in my early 30s. I was at a food systems design workshop. And Stuart Brand was there, who was kind of is the godfather of the internet, and just a really incredible human and speaker. It was a real privilege to hear him. But he said something that always stuck with me, and I wrote about it in the book. He said, you're not better than anybody else because you lead a team, or because you're a leader, an owner, a CEO of a big business, or anything else. And you have to understand, like, who was in the room. It was all of those kinds of people. He said, you just have a different assignment. You just have different responsibilities. We're all people, and we're all just figuring it out in our own moment, in our own way. So, that for me changed everything, because I realized, I could absolutely approach things like that. And I did. And it unlocked a lot for me. So I think, being transparent, and it's also, I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit difficult as a woman in leadership as opposed to a man, because that gender thing is real, right? And I had to stylistically kind of twister myself to figure out, like, how can I talk to people in different capacities, in different ways, and have the messages land. It's something that is real, and that we have to navigate, and hopefully one day it won't be that way. But I think if you really care about motivating people and inspiring, you also care about figuring out how to message to create those magic moments, right? It's just part of the work that we all have to do.
It's about becoming in love with the result, and not. I've said it 100 times, to young managers. It's like, I know what you want to say. Like, I know the words you want to use, and it's going to be effective potentially, but it's going to be stinging, and it's going to be this cathartic thing that's going to feel so good because they're going to feel stupid, but they're going to learn from it. but it just doesn't work. You just have to be in love with the outcome. And so I would assume that, by and large, that's one of the biggest struggles we have as a leader, is not saying the thing that we want to say, but it's working towards the result that we want to see.
Absolutely. And understanding and recognizing how important communication is and style is. And, that your job is really to influence and motivate and help others perform in the way that you're hoping they will, to achieve collective goals for the organization and for the success of everyone. It's not your success, right? It's your team's success. And the only reason why you're successful is because they're lifting you into success. So the sooner you get to that conclusion and understand how interconnected everything is, I think the sooner it really unlocks team performance. So, yeah.
Let's talk about enrollment.
Okay.
Because I think that's really where it gets difficult. It's that Jerry Maguire moment where you're like, here's where we're going. Who's coming with me? And then it's just crickets. So, right.
It's so true. And that moment is like literally, I cannot tell you how many times I've referenced that moment, especially for people who think, they're going to burn it all down on the way out or something. And you're like, guess what?
Sure.
Nobody cares.
Mhm.
5 minutes later, the world is still turning and life
Absolutely.
is happening and work is going. Yeah.
And so what does that look like? What does enrollment look like from a leadership perspective? I think that when you look at the industry at large and you see that for a long time we were considered pirates and mercenaries, and even in manufacturing, even in the more corporatized side of food, it's still very much that. It's an industry of second chances, especially in back of house. And if that's the case, how do you enroll people?
So
How do you have that Jerry Maguire moment and more than that one person stands up?
So I think it goes exactly to that interconnectedness. I think we all have a collective responsibility as food service leaders, as industry people, to swing the door wide open for the next generation of leaders and to help them understand what their opportunities are and what they can gain by, stepping into whatever the operation is or the industry role or the environment. And I think, the way that I kind of talk about this is, when you go to a college and you're looking at career pathing, nobody ever talks about food unless you're going to a very specific college, because it's completely dismissed as a real career path. Like, you tell people, oh yeah, I want to go work in a restaurant. And they're like, oh, when are you going to go get a real job? It is a real job. It's $1 trillion industry. Restaurant sales in 2023 hit almost $1 trillion. That's restaurant sales alone. I mean, it's an extraordinarily powerful industry with all sorts of robust career paths. But we in the industry have to start nurturing that reputation that exists, that is real, and also unlocking the tools to help people, thrive in their businesses and in their roles, period. So when you talk about enrollment, it's about reputation. It's about putting the energy toward the industry that's positive, and also helping people to understand that, hey, that gig economy job with the flexibility is awesome and it greats and it works like in this chapter of life. But unfortunately, if you want to keep moving forward in your career, if you don't have access to people who are lifting you up, who are challenging you, who are teaching you new skills, who are teaching you new, processes, opportunities, colleagues, and, you're continuing to evolve, then you're kind of staying stagnant. So what do you want for your future? Because I get why this works today and in this time period. But for tomorrow, have you thought about that? Because this is how we grow. We grow together. We grow in environments that push us out of our comfort zone, where we stretch and we leap. And we all need those things in order to achieve more and more. So, I think that's one of the things that the gig economy hasn't been spoken about enough, is that it's really desirable, sure, for this period of time. But then what? So.
Yeah, absolutely. You speak about the demands on leaders, on teams, which brings about this idea of balance, right? Like, people talk about work-life balance, but there also needs to be balance within work. And you talk about this dichotomy, this management big five.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Talk to me about the push and pull of that and how that works in a larger ecosystem.
Okay. So the way that I visualize this, and I write about it in the book this way, is like, a really cool bar with all the cool bar taps where, you've got like all these bar taps that'll labeled with different things. And it's really about how do you prioritize business initiatives, right? So you've got the needs of the business, you've got the needs of your bosses, of your customers, the needs of your team, but then you also have the needs of yourself. And figuring out when to pull which lever is part of learning and growing, right, from management and into leadership. And I think a big shift that we also don't talk about enough in helping people try to navigate challenging situations at work is recognizing that at the end of the day, when we're in a management role or in a leadership role, we have a responsibility to the company to achieve the goals so that we do stay in business. And how important the business thriving is to paying payroll, our salaries, and for food and product cost and transportation, logistics, and all of the utilities. You go through the list of the costs, and we talk about it all the time in our world, restaurant operations and food operations running less than 5% profit margins, right? Very commonly, even less than that, right? Sometimes not even that, which is obviously a big problem. But you have to remember that, you are in business and you want to stay in business. And if you want to grow people and champion people, then helping them to understand their fiduciary responsibility to the business and why it matters to them. If we give food away, if we give product away, if we turn a blind eye when it's walking out the door, if we, don't have discipline and controls in our business, those are all things that ultimately can take us down and our jobs. Right? So I think when you frame it that way and you start looking at this business and you think, how can I find more here? And how can I inspire my team to understand that the money isn't just coming from like this kind of non-entity, like the Wizard of Oz hiding behind the purple thing. Like this is a real thing. This is a business. And we have to figure out how to be more and more successful incrementally, because then everybody's going to benefit from that, right? Jobs are going to stay, wages are going to grow, food opportunities, really interesting, more creative jobs are going to come through that. But it all starts with this one thing, which is, running a business that's profitable, that's cash flow positive, and that stays that way.
I think that it goes back to something you discussed earlier, which was transparency. Yeah, for so many of us as business owners, our teams think that we get in our Bentley or we take whatever car we're in
you
to
have
the
it
Bentley
so easy
so that nobody sees that we have it. That's one thing I said time and time again, especially in the earliest days of the pandemic. It's just because you own a beautiful restaurant doesn't mean you live in a beautiful house. There is almost never a correlation between
probably if you do have a beautiful house, you're never seeing it anyway because you're in your restaurant all the
for
time.
sure.
So there's that.
And so that being the case, it's not about empathy, but it is about visibility, because I don't expect anyone to feel bad for me and my situation as a business owner. I got myself into it. But through the visibility, I think that we're able to show. It seems like for so long it was always about infallibility, right? That like I would walk. There's this story I've told time and time again about how catty corner to my restaurant, there was a dude that owned a restaurant, and I was always busier than him. And not that we were competing. It was two different types of cuisines. He was lunch and dinner. I was just dinner. It was all of these things. But I would ask him all the time as I would walk to the bank, because I would pass him on the way to the bank, and I'd say, how's business? And he would always say, great. And every now and then I'd be like, fuck, really? Because my business isn't great this week. Like, we're up and down, and like, you're always great, but like, nobody's ever in here. But like, I didn't question it. I just assumed he was a genius and I was an idiot.
Of course, right? Because that's what we do. It's always, doubting ourselves, right?
Right. And then one day it's just shuttered. Like the week before, great week for him. Broke records. The next week, he's out of business. Yeah. And there's no transparency. There's no visibility. There's no vulnerability. I mean, in my own business, when I let people know how much money we made or didn't make, when I let people know what the expected result was of whatever the next initiative was, they were able to enroll in that. And It was super valuable.
But that's the critical piece, having access to the tools so that you can empower people to understand how a business runs, how it functions. upskill every single person on your team so that you're sitting down and having financial conversations around what's happening in your business. There's nothing more important than that. And I will say, having worked for a lot of restaurant companies, the ones where they would literally carve out time to talk about the financials, where there were projections and goals every day to hit and understanding things. Like, I remember as an hourly worker really looking at the weather and wondering, is there going to be a big catering event today? How's the outside going to do? Like, are we going to do okay? Because I had a manager who was awesome and who talked about these things all the time. And it took me a while to understand, when I was growing into management, why my team didn't know these things, because nobody had taught them and trained them. And I realized, oh, I lucked out. But now I have to kind of pay it forward. Like, this is really important piece. So I think, you talk about enrollment, you have to talk about empowerment, and you have to show people and help them incrementally and invest in them, because together you're so much stronger, right? You're so much stronger.
Well, and I think that's you lead by example. So it's being based in Los Angeles for 20 years. I didn't hire bartenders and servers and bussers. I hired actors and models and singers, and everybody was like literally one great audition away from telling me to go fuck myself, And so truly, that was it, And it's like, and I remember being young too, and knowing that like the person that was looking at me saw me in this role, but they didn't see who I really was. But that one day I would get that opportunity to shine. And I think that so often in our business, like we choose to stick our head in the sand and not believe that like these people have aspirations outside of our industry, and that we've done a terrible job of trying to help them aspire to do things within the industry.
Yeah, but you can't write people off.
No, you can't. And also, a point that you brought up that I think we should underscore is the idea of mutual investment. That like they're not going to invest in your business, in your dreams, in your life until you invest in theirs first. And it's about more than a paycheck.
Yeah.
It's about interest.
Yeah.
It's about investment. It's about connections. It's about showing them that they don't work for a business. They are getting paid to learn, and probably one of the most valuable educational environments one could imagine.
Absolutely. That will serve them in any capacity down the road. Absolutely right. So true.
And so they say success leaves clues. So you've got a successful business. You've worked for and with other successful businesses along the way. What are the common threads you've seen?
Discipline. I'm going to start that right there. I think that when you have systems in place and when you take the time to do that properly, it really helps everything, because then you're not living in this frenetic bubble where you're just constantly trying to make sure you have enough money in the bank account for the business to keep going. And it's part of the reason why I wrote my second book, which is called How to Design the Perfect Menu System, because I took all of my institutional knowledge from large scale corporations and these kind of common problems I continuously see with my clients in my consulting business. Mom and pop clients have all these kind of repeat problems, and they all boil down to not setting up the systems and investing in the foundational tools so that they can then operate those tools. So trying to create really easy access to them, downloadable templates that are really customizable, and they're all free on the website. So it's like, go get them and use them. But by and large, if you need help and you don't know how to run your business, you've got to put your hand up. And I think, when you tell that sad story about the guy that's like, yeah, everything's great, and then he's closed all of a sudden, that's happening all over the place. And there is no shame in saying, hey, I need help. And I think that, again, the stronger and better theme is so critical in our industry, not only to create this energy and environment around the truth of the opportunity side, to invite workers to come in and invest their time and careers, but also to help each other so that we are running more profitable businesses, so that we are growing together. And then we're fostering and creating these companies with resources that can help grow teams the right way. right? So it's all interconnected.
What should we steal from you? What are the tactics, tools, and
You don't have to
strategies?
steal it. It's all there. No, I think, that's why all of my tools on our company website are ungated at this point. I'm really looking for feedback. So I really invite everybody to go in and download and customize and play with them and let us know how they need to be, stronger and better and easier to use. I think, remembering that you're not alone, that there are so many people who experience what you experience every single day, and that it's okay to say it, and looking for that community, whether it's locally based and it's people who are around your neighborhood who can help your business and support you. And also, talking about talent and turning this into, I think, a shared talent economy, which is something that we also haven't had time to talk about. But just because somebody maybe isn't thriving in their role or they're not challenged because they've kind of met the ceiling in the job doesn't mean that 2 business owners or 10 business owners can't say, hey, I've got this really great person and they've timed out in their job. I want to find them their next challenge. Can you help me? I need to backfill them. Do you know anybody? And then help them get into that next right job so they continue to grow. And guess what? They'll come back one day and they'll pay it forward. And we can all operate our businesses and our workforces that way. And so I think there's just a lot of opportunity for all of us, whether it's business leaders, restaurant leaders. But, in terms of stealing stuff, it's like, just take it. It's available. It's there. The interpersonal skills development that you need as a leader, it's there. The tactical side, those systems and tools and processes and learnings are there. Take it, whatever you need. And that's one of the joyful things about being in the season of life, is building these kinds of tools that help propel people forward right now, and swing the door open for the next generation of leaders to hopefully do it way better and way easier than we had it.